part of our six-part series on work-based learning. We're very excited to move into our data and storytelling session today. The first three sessions have been incredibly informative and inspiring. If you haven't had a chance to participate in those, the recordings are going to be available. I highly recommend that you go back and watch those. So today we're going to be looking into how do we frame our narratives, use our data in our visualization, and crafting student success narratives. We all know that those go a very long way in showing outcomes. Data can be dry, but when you show the impact on a student's experience and their life, that is just changing the trajectory of their whole life. So I just want to thank Ahmad Mansour for being here today and for hosting this topic with us.
Thank you, Dr. Dadarian. Great to see you, and thank you for this opportunity. I am so excited to tackle this subject around data storytelling, mainly because what we often do with our data is put spreadsheets out, and we think that that's it. But there's a much larger story that we could tell with data that really have a lot of influence and persuasion with our audiences. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity to present. I think the other thing too for me is that I used to work for a data evaluation or for an evaluation company. And there were just a lot of really smart people there, like really smart nerds with data. And my job was to take that data and turn it into stories that were just a little bit more digestible, to the audiences that we dealt with there. And so let's go. Let me pull this up here. There we go.
While you're doing that, Ahmad, I just want to thank Dr. McKeegan for being here. I put it in the chat. I forgot to say it. If it weren't
Oh,
for her vision and for helping to provide the funding, we wouldn't have had this professional development series. So we're so very, very thankful because it's having a huge impact on our work-based learning regional project.
great. Absolutely. Absolutely. So continue to share PowerPoint. Okay. So once again, welcome to Data Storytelling, communicating narratives to our stakeholders in work-based learning, really throughout the whole LA region here. So I just want to welcome everyone. So I want to actually start off by talking about the power of story. Um, as we know, as humans, we're telling stories all the time, even when we don't know it. When we wake up, when our mind starts thinking about what we're going to do for the day, we're actually developing stories. That's one of the beautiful things about being humans, that we have a capacity that no other species have. And that is the ability to use our imagination to think about things in ways that it's just not about the now, but it's about the future. And the beautiful thing about stories, and one of the key areas, is that it brings out our emotions and our passion. And I think that's something that we often miss when we're working around data. Once again, if we're at the community colleges, when we're program coordinators, deans, like all of our positions, we're often asked to present information. And the first thing that we often do is bring out the data because we want to show that we have met some type of metrics, whether that's from a grant, whether that's from a task, whatever that range may be. And sometimes that's helpful, but in many ways, we're taking away the power that we have, and that is to really show something just a bit more compelling and influence on the audience that we're working with here. So, all right. So, what the heck is data storytelling? And what makes that different from just storytelling or just presenting data? And so, in the broader sense, it's just communicating our insights, what we've learned from the collection of data that we've been able to put together. And the key goal is to really make sure that we find ways to take our message and those insights and communicate it to our audience clearly in ways that's compelling and actionable. And once again, instead of just sharing data, we just want that data to have clarity and a sense of purpose. And so what's the value of data storytelling? Well, first of all, when we're talking about data, going back to our spreadsheets, that data oftentimes is a lot, and I think if we know our PowerPoints and we know our colleagues, sometimes we can just put just a big blob of spreadsheet data on a PowerPoint, and it can create a lot of confusion. And so when you start doing data storytelling, it's actually providing us with the opportunity to simplify that information, to make it less complex and just a little bit more focused by highlighting key points. And this is really critical for people who have to make decisions that's related to your program or project. So the whole idea is to take data, bring the attention to it, and really show the bigger picture of what's going on there. So when you're working with data storytelling, there is actually a framework that we want to work from. And there's three elements to it. I guess you can say three stools to the chair. And the first piece is what we already know, and that's the data. Pulling up our spreadsheets, just bringing just a range of data to what we need to present. But the first thing we need to do is to look at how can we analyze that data that we've collected to glean some of the key information there that we think can have an influence and impact on our audience. The second element there is that we need to look at a narrative and what is the storyline that we can put together and communicate that gleans some of the key insights, some of the key data that we've been able to collect, and how can we put that in a context that really leads to what a lot of us leave out when we're doing this type of work, and that is the call to action, which really what your presentation should be about. What is the call to action at the end of the day? Third piece of this is that we want some type of compelling visual, so when you start looking at data, the way I kind of look at it is data plus narrative equals some visual that really takes the story and make it compelling and communicate to our audience. And so what is the purpose of data storytelling? Quite frankly, it's about changing minds. So often when we do these presentations, we have a tendency to think that we just need to report out, whether it's reporting out to our president, to deans, to our peers, to our students, that we just simply need to report out. And that's like the lowest level of presentation for the compelling data that we have. There's just much more that we could do with our data in order to have some type of influence. And so the goal is to change minds and to be persuasive and be in an influence relationship with your colleagues and peers around this data. Other aspect of this is that we need to look at who's our audience. Because sometimes, once again, when we're doing these presentations, we make these presentations very generic because we feel so strongly about the data and what it's saying that we sometimes forget to really look at the audience that we need to present this to. And that's so important. And here's the reason why. Because when you're presenting data and information to college and presidents and chancellors, what do you think would they be looking for lots of data points? Probably not. They'll be looking for some big picture aspect of what you're trying to communicate with them. So it becomes critical that when you're working with presidents, that you're looking at something or data or some type of storytelling that's related to the big picture and then giving them a call to action. I think so often when we present to college presidents and VPs and chancellors, we're doing it many times to make sure that they know that we're doing our job, that we're impressive. But it's really an opportunity to persuade them to take some type of action. So you just don't want to just present and say, okay, this is what I've done. Look how beautiful this presentation is. Look what we've been able to achieve. No, you want to find ways to ask your college presidents for a call to action at their level. And that can be from a policy standpoint, it can be from a funding standpoint, or it can just simply be from an appearance standpoint. You may want them to show up somewhere and really support your program or project that's related to your work-based learning. And then when you're working with deans, as you know, when you're working with deans and associate deans, and with me previously being one, so I could speak to this, the deans and associate deans are operators. They're the managers. They're the ones that are looking at everything from a 360-degree position, being inside of the ecosystem. And so when you're doing presentations to deans around data and information, you really want to look at what strategy that they can put in place. What can they operationalize? And so you want your data storytelling to really reflect that. When you're dealing with directors and faculty members, now you're getting with people who are in the woods. They're like, these are the people who are going into the classrooms, they're connecting with students. And so they want something that they could put in play tomorrow, literally tomorrow, or should I say today. And so your data should actually reflect that. It shouldn't be as high level, because if you make it super high level, I guarantee you that those faculty members will draw in on you and say, hey, what about this presentation speaks to what I need to do today? And so it's important that your data reflects that. And of course, when you're dealing with employers and associations and community members, you want to make your data speak to what's an ROI, what's the return on investment, because that's their language that they can understand. If you're implementing a work-based learning program, you have to speak to data that speaks to what their needs are. And so if we have a work-based learning program such as an apprenticeship or an internship, you want to talk about things like pipeline. Like we have, you may want to have a big data set that says that 80% of our students are trained in XYZ, and now they just need the experience to move into opportunities of work. And once you kind of put it like that and you start speaking to the ROI of that, then your information, your story starts to make a difference to them. And when you're dealing with students, obviously, students want to know about how can their program benefit them. And so you have to start looking at how can you tell a story around the benefits of work-based learning or internships or a program in particular. Now, the example that I often like to give, and this is very interesting, is that when you're dealing with like students, a lot of times in the career technical education area, we have a tendency to think that what really connects with students as our audience is when you put something around wages, And interestingly, that may connect to some of our students, but some of our students really connect to experiences. And I always like to take the example of like the military, which is really good at this. The military, if you look at some of their commercials, they never really speak about going to war. They never speak about the activity of going to war. They often bring on images that plays to people's emotions. Like I remember one, you guys may have seen the commercial where you just have Army members just sitting around the pool table playing pool. And there's nothing related to war, but what they're trying to communicate is that there's a sense of belonging, when you have Army members around one another. So when you're looking at data storytelling with students, you may want to look at bringing more visuals that's connected to the experience of a particular work-based learning or some type of outcome related to work-based learning. And so what are some of the deliveries that we can do for data storytelling? Often what we know is the PowerPoint presentation, right? But a PowerPoint presentation is great with our colleagues when we have, in a room of 10 to 100 people, whether it's in a conference room or et cetera. But there are other ways in which we could use data storytelling to create a very compelling, to have influence over our audience. We can do that through keynote speaking. And often that's what our presidents do. They do keynote speaking and they give usually these big picture understanding of our programs like work-based learning. Social media is a great way to do data storytelling, just by one post. And oftentimes we use graphics and very compelling pictures to really kind of connect with our audience. Newsletters are great because you can build a community. You can get people to start anticipating what will be like the next story that you're going to tell that's related to the work that they do. Quarterly reports, we all know what those are, and marketing. And marketing is key. And so what goes into crafting a data story? So it's actually a little bit more complicated, or it's a little bit more sophisticated than what we probably think of when we're putting together our PowerPoint presentations. One of which is that we want to really kind of stop and think. So what is our theory that we're putting in play here? When I say theory, like think about like how do we want to have influence? What is our theory around the data that we have here in our data set that we're looking at? What do we want to tell? The other aspect is, and I spoke earlier about this, what is our call to action? And I really want to stress that because so often we do not put that in our presentations. What is our call to action? What is the purpose of the story? And this is a great exercise to just take one sentence and just write the theme of what your data speaks to. And obviously, we want to determine what those what are those visuals that we want to put in that helps glean the insights. This is a critical one, of course, we know. And we do want to engage our people emotionally. What can we speak to that will like capture them and capture the moment? And we'll talk a little bit more about this last one, and that is the story arc. What is the narrative arc that we're going to tell from the point of our first slide or our first presentation to the end? So let's talk a little bit about what the story arc looks like. And one aspect of it is that you want to quickly get the attention of your audience. So what kind of hook can we put in play to get the attention of our audience? So a lot of times that can be some compelling data point that just make everyone kind of stop in their tracks. Or it can just be a good sentence that gets people to stop in their tracks. And one good way to look at this is just to put some big visual, not with a lot of information on there, just something that just makes people stop and look and you get their attention. And then once you do that, then you can start building up a story, by bringing some of your data points up forward. And so you're building up a story with just some small data points that actually speaks to the topic at hand and the influence that you're trying to persuade your audience to do. And then you want to hit them with an aha moment, and that is something that is contrarian to what or how they may have thought about, how they may have thought about um, their thinking around a certain topic or subject. So if we're looking at our work-based learning programs, for example, you know, it could be that, our programs have been going super well, then all of a sudden, we saw a spike in the number of students that are moving into our nursing work-based learning or going into our megatronics programs where, the aha moment may be that we need to expand in that area. That's an area that we need to have to more growth and development in. And then once again, you want to start looking at solutions and what are some of those next steps you could look at. And that's that call to action. Once again, do not be afraid. If you're presenting to a president and you are a program coordinator that's been invited in there, use that as your moment. Do not shrink. I guarantee you that it will be an opportunity for you to not only show what you could do, but have the impact for the work that you've been putting in to your project there. So I'll give you a good example. Like, we hear stats, but we feel stories. That's kind of the best way to put it. I took that quote from somewhere. I just couldn't find I couldn't find a person. So out there, I'm giving attribution to someone out there who I actually couldn't find their names to give them that attribution. And so this is a really good example. There was a case study done at Stanford, and it really looked at this ideal of we hear stats, but we feel stories. And so we take this ideal of Save the Children. Now, everyone knows Save the Children and what their intentions are. And what they found is that when they used statistics alone, they did this study that the contributions totaled to about $1.14 per child. But when they started using stories that were a little bit more compelling, like these beautiful kids in the background here, when they start using stories, that it almost doubled. It went from $1.14 to $2.38 per child. And so what we learned from that and what their conclusion was is that when audience are presented with a majority of facts, a shield kind of goes up. And we've all been there. We've all been in the rooms where that data is thrown to us, and all of a sudden we start looking down at our phones and wondering, how the kids are doing, or, what's enrollment looking like at the moment. And they become a little bit more skeptical. But once you start, but what they found was that the shield goes down once these stories start happening. And it goes back to what I stated when I started this presentation. And that is that as humans, we connect when we connect to something that brings out our emotions. It's the only way that we can actually look at the future. If not, our futures actually become dangerous to us. We start feeling this sense of what they call stranger danger. The future is disconnected. And so we need stories to help compel us to move our programs forward, to make those feel like we're connected to them in some way. So I want to go back to data visualization. So there's many ways you can do data visualization. And I'm going to give you some like visual examples of those. However, these are some of the key things that we're used to seeing. The line charts, which we know, and line charts are great because line charts is a real quick snapshot. But once again, even when you're doing line charts, what are some of the key areas there that you can glean to make visible? Because sometimes we can do line charts and we leave the interpretation up to the audience to figure out what's important. And so there's a little trick that I'm going to show you in a moment where things like line charts can become a little bit more persuasive by just one hack that we'll get into in a moment. Obviously, we know about bar charts, which we use so often. And then going back to key moments, those visuals, like the one I just showed you around the Save the Children. So here's an example. This is a hack that I do. So I'm gonna give you a couple of examples of what I do when I do my presentation. So this is something I did where I really wanted to make visible. I was doing something on the future of work and engagement. And really what I wanted to make visible was how employee engagement has gone down. And I said by 67% of employees are disengaged at work. And so if you look at this chart here, this is a hack. I could have just left this big 67% off and just had this graph here, right? But I would have left it to the audience to make the interpretation of what that means, even if I was just speaking to it. But if you look at this graph, everyone's eyes and attention goes directly to the 67%, so much where the background is just that. It almost feels like just background material. Here's another example that I did in one of my presentations. I wanted to do a comparison, and I wanted to talk about how I was speaking with leaders, and I was sharing with leaders how complexity has been like one of the key issues for leaders in running their organizations, one of the big challenges of running an organization. So I took an IBM study and I focused in on what is called the complexity gap, 79%. And so once again, that sticks out so much and it gives so much credibility that the words on the right-hand side, it's just a context for the 79%. Another example, I did something on work-life balance. And once again, I put the 50% there and it just like sticks out. And when you have things like this, anything that I say on the right-hand side, I'm literally leading my audience into the interpretation of what that 50% is. Sometimes they may not even look at what's on the right-hand side. They just want to really hear an explanation, whether that's coming from me verbally or some key areas but their focus is on that 50%. And so I just want to give a few other examples of how our data can show up. There's ways in which we can do comparisons, where we're taking different data sets and putting those into clusters. We have this type of data in which it's very visual, where we're looking at using kind of the color sources to help tell a story. And so like, if you look at this, there's many different ways that you would be able to make some type of interpretation. This example, it doesn't matter what the topic is, but we can look at this and say that, wow, there's lots of green, dark green in the northern and North and South America. Whatever topic we were doing, that would say something. And that's all we would need to put out there. And obviously, this is something that we know because at our community colleges, we use the BI tool, the business intelligence tool. We all know it. This is a great way of showing data if you want to show the big picture around something, but you have to be careful when you're using dashboards and BI tools, because if you're not guiding your audience through the process, they can get lost in these visuals. Sometimes dashboards, it can be this is a very beautiful visual here. And so it allows people to actually get a little lost in the data, but they can pick and choose and find what actually supports whatever their theory or whatever their theory of change is. And so this is helpful, but you have to really kind of guide people through. And usually when you're using a dashboard, it's when you really want to get into the particulars of something. A lot of faculty members like dashboards because they can look at areas in which they can put action into place fairly quickly. And I won't go over all of these, but I just want to give you an example of some of the other types of visuals that can be used when we are when we're doing our presentations and when we're trying to tell a story. All right. So it doesn't appear that we have a huge group here, but I did create an exercise for you all if you want to participate in it. And I'm going to put it here. Let's see here. I'm going to pull it up here. And let's see. There it is. Actually, before I do that, let me just download the whole thing here. All right. Can everyone see this? Okay, great. Oops, that's the wrong one. Sorry. You guys, the wrong one there. My apologies. Put this up here. My apologies here. Just give me one moment.
No worries.
All right, here we go. Share this with you all. All right. So I wanted us just to have an opportunity to just see how this could work in terms of really looking at constructing a data storytelling. So last week, I think in our last presentation, we talked about data and equity. So I thought this would be a really good example to kind of follow up on here. And I'll just go over it. So here's the scenario. The scenario is that we're looking at our community college work-based learning programs, right? And I put here 5,000 enrolled, in which that would be beautiful if we had 5,000 interns in print and work-based learning programs going on. But our students participate in those intern and apprenticeships is approximately like 24%. The participation by group is as follows. And I put a link in there. So if you want to pull that up on your desktop. Oh, you know what? That was actually the wrong link. So my apologies. I'll just go over it. So the participation by group is as follows. The completion rate, our job placement rate. And so really what I want to do in this real quick exercise, and I'll find the link so we can pull it up again, is to really identify with those numbers, to identify what would be your real insight just from that data set there. Like, once again, we're not getting super sophisticated with this, but what would be an insight by looking at that data that you would want to make visible in a presentation? So what are, in one aspect you can look at it, what are some of those patterns, the disparities, but also how would you build a story on that? And I'm asking you all to have some sense of imagination with this, because obviously this would be a much larger business case. But how would you build a story using that data and creating some real insight? So looking at the context of what's happening. So you can make this up if you want. It's all good. What would be some of the tensions around equity and the equity gap? And what
Uh,
would this actually reveal by looking at these numbers? And
uh-huh.
then,
Were you gonna share this document?
excuse me?
Were you gonna share this document?
I am going to share these documents. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Um, the other aspect would be, let's see here. And then looking at it from an audience specific standpoint, if you were presenting this information, what would that look like if you were presenting it to a college president or a workforce partner, a program director, or a community group? And then once that information is there, what would be the deliverable? So the deliverable in this sense would be to just do, because it's real quickly, to do a one or two sentence that kind of captures what that data story is. Then the other aspect is to choose some type of visualization that would actually go with the story that you're telling. So what I did is I put some of these visuals here that you would choose from. So once again, this is not a very super sophisticated approach here. We just want to get a feeling for what this looked for. And what I'm going to try to do here, because I did download, I just need to figure out how to get to it here. That's not the one. Let's see. My apologies, everyone. I don't. Going to send you the link here for this. Okay, if we can just use this here, and I don't know how helpful this would be, but if we could use this, the one that I had here. There you go. So we can just kind of start off here, if you can, by just looking at the data here. Here's the kind of the business case. So you have participation groups. Here are the data for the participation, the completion rates, and the job placement. So just look at that data for right here and just start to think about what would be a key insight for you all by just looking at this particular data. And once again, you could use your imagination because this business case can be really across the board here. So what would be your insight from this? Okay, we go forward. So from there, what would you identify as a key insight from looking at that data? You know, what pattern did you see there? particular type of disparity that you see from that data. And once again, I'll go over it again here.
Hi, Ahmed. There's a chat. There's a note in the chat that there are inequities in certain student populations. Is one thing.
Okay, hold on to that because we're going to go over that. So hold tight, hold on to that. So how would you build a story from what insight that you found there? How would you make this a compelling story that you would want to tell, let's say in a 5-minute presentation? What's happening for you? And once again, you can use your imagination because the scenarios can be across the board there. We talked about the insight. And then what are the implications of this from the data? What are the implications? Now, you all can kind of self-select with this, but what would be a group that you would want to present this to? Would it be a college president? Someone take a shot at a college president, workforce, a program manager, or a community group. And with community groups, you really do have to like dig down and let them know how they can benefit from what you're stating because they want answers and they want it now. Right. The last part of this exercise is to take a 1 to 2 sentence and theme out what your data story would be there. What would be your theme and how would you describe the story if you were presenting it? And once again, my apologies. I uploaded the wrong document, so I'm just going to go through this very slowly. What would be a diagram that you would take, and you don't have to select from here, but what type of diagram would you take to represent the story that you're telling to your audience there? I'll put one more up here. There you go.
Would it be helpful if you just maybe paste the data just in the chat because I forget?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Just the top part at least, so that we can just the top percentages.
Oh yeah, yes. That's a good idea. Thank you. Perfect idea.
Yeah. Could just paste it in the chat.
All right. There you go. Got it?
Got it. Thank you.
All right.
Kenyatta in chat said, would it be a bar chart since it's comparing categories at a glance?
All right. Hold on to that. How many people do we have online here? Let's see.
We have 35.
Oh, wow. For some reason, I thought it was only a couple of people showing up here. Let's see here. All right, I'll give you one more minute and then we'll bring it back and open it up for discussion. All right. So first, I just want to say that whatever answer you provide is the right answer. So this is not really about, fitting something into a particular like pre-made presentation. Whatever you choose would actually be the right answer there. And so I'm going to go over some of this here. Okay, so we have Kenyatta that says, would it be a bar chart? Kenyatta, is she on here?
Yeah, she's on.
Kenyatta, you want to come forward and talk a little bit about about what you've come up with?
Yes.
All
Hello.
right.
As I apologize, I'm currently in a meeting, so I'll make it brief.
Oh, yeah,
So
sure.
for I would say bar chart, just because it's doing comparisons between the completion rates and the post-program job placement and the participation. So just comparison wise, I figured it'd be that's one chart that could be used.
Okay. Thank you. That's fantastic.
There's another chat. Ahmed Benny said pictorial fraction chart since 24% of the student participated in internships.
That's a good one. Did anyone come up with anything really exotic? Any exotic charts out there? That's great. That's a good one, Benny.
I think exotic charts sometimes drive people away because it's kind of like heavy on comprehension. So I find that a lot of times simpler chart works better.
Absolutely. No, I would agree. And I think what you just stated there is a great way to really think about your audience. I mean, that is such a great example. And once again, we're always shooting for simplicity and really understanding the kind of the behavior of your audience. And one of the things about presentations that are very interesting is that in many ways it's bringing in, what is referred to as behavioral economics, and that is that bringing in stories and bringing in data that not only impacts one emotionally, but something that takes them out of their rational mind. Because a lot of times when we present data, we have a tendency to think of it in the most rational way that it's going to impact people. But I have a news story for you all. According to the behavioral economist, Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, most of us are working mainly from our irrational selves. And that's because we're constantly impacted by the biases that hit us on a daily basis, on a moment by moment basis. So the more that you could bring in the type of data that's compelling, that really hits the people's irrational side. That's why when you look at commercials, so often they put these weird images out here that has really nothing to do with the most rational aspect of ourselves. It's because they're really looking to kind of get your attention and play to some aspect of your emotion. Now, their intentions a lot of time are bad. Our intentions is good. We're looking to impact people's lives and the community there. So that would be a good example. Does anyone else want to share? We're coming at the end, or have any questions that they would like to speak to regarding this exercise?
Quick question, Ahmad. This is Sheila.
Sure.
Sorry for being off camera.
That's okay.
I'm wondering, would you be inclined to use different charts for your different audiences to try to elicit, a better outcome or a specific, like say for, the COOs, you would try to guide them towards providing more resources. To the job developers or hiring people, you would really point out the disparities. What do you think?
Absolutely. And once again, when you're dealing with the COOs, you want to have charts and data charts that is super that creates hyper focus on something that you can grab their attention and then just deliver what you're trying to state to them. That's why I often use the big numbers, because CEOs and COOs, they like seeing a number that really impacts their bottom line. And so when you can come up with a number that really stops them in their tracks, it really provides you with an opportunity to go in there and, you know, pose a call to or present a call to action that will get them to do something on behalf of what you're seeking them to do. And so definitely, but with COOs and CEOs, any type of an executive level individual, you just simply want to keep as least amount of information on the PowerPoint as well. You know, just something that just really hits and stands out. And so to your point, Sheila, like you don't want to have like big, like a dashboard. You know, I showed you guys the dashboard. You don't want to have a dashboard, you know, when you're working with executive level people. It's just too much for them to take in for the amount of time that you have with them. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to provide you all with some books that are really good at this. There's one book, and as we've done with all our workshops, we'll put it in a file and provide it to LARC, in which they'll put it and give it to you either via email or find it on our site. However, one book that really sticks out is called Made to Stick, and that was written probably about 10 years ago by Dan Heath. And it's a really good book when it comes to speaking around how to construct narratives and stories that's what his book says, stick. And then there's another book called Effective Data Storytelling, which I'm forgetting the gentleman's name. He is more like the guru of data storytelling. So we'll provide you with some resources and some additional forms in order to support your data storytelling communication experience. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Ruth. And once again, thank you all for indulging me in this process. And once again, my apologies for putting the incorrect link into the chat there. So thanks for improvising with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad, for that presentation. And I just kind of want to round it out and bring it home with some takeaways that really struck me. And it comes down to the changing of the minds, right? And the persuasion, the call to the action, and the tying it to funding, right? And as this regional project is going to be rounding out June 30th, we don't want the work to stop, right? But we need to show our, you know, whoever's in charge of the funding or our CEOs, the impact that this project has had, right? We have clearly demonstrated outcomes with this project of increasing the work-based learning opportunities. We're just getting into the equity pieces and disaggregating, but to be able to show that in visualizations, to show how we're moving towards hopefully closing those equity gaps, to help influence the decision makers to allocate funding and grant dollars or general funds to ensure that this work continues, right? And I love that we hear stats, but we feel stories. And I know on the biannual reporting, a lot of the reporting was, you know, statistics, etc. But we were encouraged, and we did include personal stories from students of the impact that it had personally on them. So that's my takeaway. I hope that all of you will use your data to try to keep this work moving, even though the regional project is going to be ending June 30th, because we've done lots of great work.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Darian, may I add just one piece here? And you brought it up,
Sure.
and I just want to make sure that everyone knows this. So I'm not disparaging like raw data points also. So when you are doing reports and you just have to put like raw data in there, like I love beautiful reports. I love visuals, and I'm into like design because I love to tell the story. But sometimes when you do reports, sometimes those reports you may need to put, data charts in there that because you're appealing to a broader audience. And sometimes you're just going to have nerds in there that just really want to get in there and just kind of break down that data a little bit more than what any of us may be interested in. So I just wanted to throw that piece in there.
Yeah, and just a fun fact, I see Professor Shaw here from PCC, and she's one of the leads on our data science team. So I may be tapping into her and her students to help us create this visualization to show our campus and our CEOs of the great work that's been done. So great, we can have ideas for collaboration.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. See you next month.